Hi everyone, I'm Ace. I'm actually just a few days away from 29, and I'm a Filipino adoptee from Sweden. So I'm adopted from the Philippines to Sweden. I'm the co-founder of Subtle Asian Adoptee Trace Europe, which is a community for Asian adoptees in Europe, and I'm also the co-host of Somewhere Between podcast, which is an Asian adoptee podcast made by Asian adoptees for Asian adoptees. Um, I currently live in Hamburg, in Germany, and I'm working as a social media manager. And yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Lainey. Apologies for the photo, it's 2 years old. I am a Chinese adoptee based in the US, grew up here, hence the American accent. I'm one of the co-founders of China's Children International, 10-year anniversary this summer, woohoo! Yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte and I'm a Chinese American adoptee. I would like to first give a big thank you to CACH-All and in particular Hannah May and Jennifer and Kate for having me and also Lainey back for this chat. Um, and I, along with Lainey, I'm one of the co-founders and current co-presidents of China's Children International, which is an international networking, support, and community group created by and for adult Chinese adoptees. I was adopted from Zhenjiang City in Jiangsu Province, China, at 5 months old in 1994. And I grew up in the greater Boston, Massachusetts area. And I currently work as a library assistant at the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies at Harvard University. And I'm currently also pursuing my master's in library and information science. So I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, I'm Grace. I'm a Chinese adoptee living in the UK. I'm adopted from Hubei province in China. Um, I'm just a general activist. I don't run any podcasts or anything like that, but I am currently writing a blog on racism in healthcare, and I work in data science as a software engineer. So this blog is also based around the tech side of it as well. Yeah, thank you for having me as well.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We are so excited to have you as we obviously hosted Ace, Great, Lainey, and Charlotte at the reunion. And actually, there were like so many questions that we could have answered and so many topics we wanted to discuss. So we thought it would be great to have you guys back. The first one is quite relevant, I think, to a lot of people, as in the last few months we've seen a rise of anti-Asian hate crime, not just in the last year during the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was especially pertinent in March during the Atlanta shootings. So I wanted to ask the panelists today, how did you feel about this, and also did you feel a part of the Asian community, or like you could turn to the Asian community at this time?
So obviously, it's nothing to feel like it's a very how to say, it's very horrible what happened. And the thing is that I think when I like heard about it, like when it became like a really big thing in media, was that I was also kind of aware that there was things like happening before this as well. And yeah, I don't know, it kind of feels weird to say this, but it's kind of, it felt like that was really a moment where like more people uh like were made aware of the hate crimes and everything that is happening to Asians, like during the pandemic and also like before the pandemic. So yeah, that's what I would say, like on the first one. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So the Atlanta shootings happened in March, I yeah, it was definitely very, very jarring. And unfortunately, I was in the midst of my semester, my course, and I wish I had had more time to be able to find spaces to process a lot of what was happening. But I was glad to see that within the Asian adoptee community and within the Chinese adoptee community also, people were making these kind of spaces to be able to talk with each other. And even sort of like what Ace was saying in the larger sort of connected to COVID-19 pandemic, the rise of xenophobia and anti-Asian sentiment. We had an intern last summer who was working on a resource packet for Chinese adoptees and for Asian adoptees in general, as to how to fight the xenophobia and how to kind of respond to it. So in that sense, it was definitely a really horrible thing that happened. But I also think it did shine a light on what was going on in Asian communities, and also gave the Asian adoptee community a place to start to process our place in it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know that CCI held some great spaces for Asian adoptees, not just Chinese adoptees. And I know Lainey also had a part in, was involved in that. Do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just speak personally, not necessarily about the chat, since those were private for our community members and just safe spaces. But I think this past year personally has been a lot of reflection on just like race and my personal experience as a Chinese woman, and the fact that my lived experience, while it is very valid as a Chinese person, is very different from other Asians in America, or just Asians in general not living in Asia. And the racial dissociation, racial trauma, racial melancholia that I experience, and then at this stage in my life, how it impacts me. Just the fact that, like, being raised pretty colorblind and in a very white community, racially isolated, and then how that impacts me as an adult. So this year has been a lot of delving into my understanding about like unpacking racism and unlearning things and understanding the Asian American community, because I personally don't really feel part of it. I feel safe only really within the Asian adoptee community is like my safe space in the Asian community. So it's like the niche community within the Asian community. So yeah, I think it's tough to feel a part of it, a part of the Asian American community for me here in America, because I didn't grow up with it. I was raised in a white community and was like the token Asian person when people finally acknowledged that I was Asian. So it is, and sorry, the third part of the question is like when you first become aware of your ethnic racial identity. I think you become aware of it fairly early on, like when you're a little, when people point out and make fun of you because you look different. So you have the intellectual understanding that, like, yes, I am different, but you don't feel different. So there's that racial dissociation of knowing you are different but not feeling it. And then as you get older, people say more mean things to you, and you're more aware of it, and people make assumptions about you. And then when you're no longer living at home and you move out, you go to school or you start a job, and you don't have that, your like white parent next to you to be like, no, this is my parent. Like, please don't make assumptions about me just because I'm Asian. But like now that you don't have that, it's constantly trying to justify who you are. And it's really complicated. Sorry to go on a rant.
No, thank you very much for sharing. And I think a lot of the adoptees that are on this call could probably relate to what you've just said. Yeah, Grace, how did you feel, obviously, in light of the Atlanta shootings? Obviously, that's probably when I think a lot of adoptees and the Asian community in general probably were hurting the most. And secondly, yeah, when did you kind of become aware of your ethnic, Asian identity?
Like those have already said, when it happened, it was really It was a bit of a shocking event, but and it did highlight the racism that like the Asian community faced. I think for me, it was already sort of I noticed that that was the triggering point for a lot of people in actually acknowledging the racism we face. I was unfortunate to have a experience before then, and my sister about a year before that, due to COVID and everything. But I didn't think at the time people really kind of acknowledged it until kind of until like the Atlanta shootings happened, and kind of people kind of woke up and was like, oh my gosh, this is what you people face. This is like what happens. So I think having to kind of deal with all that kind of going on, I still didn't feel comfortable in Asian communities either. Just because I've never felt as if I'm like Asian enough for them. It's one of those problems. So yeah, I definitely stuck to the Asian adoptee community about it because um, we I think in that because my parents are white, I didn't have to deal with the same kind of fear that kind of Asian like non-adoptees face, especially in regards to like the attacks on the elderly, you know. And I felt that I couldn't really properly relate to that in the like usual Asian circles. But I think because I was aware of my racial identity from such a young age, um, it was definitely a big kind of wake up call for me as well. Um, like just because I don't live in the US, it was still kind of a slap in the face to think, oh my God, I could like that could happen over here as well. Um, like I like from my past experiences, I was just lucky that you know it was just a minor incident compared to like a mass shooting, but yeah, it definitely sort of hit, but I kind of kept to the adoptee circles. Sorry for rambling.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think as well, especially for UK adoptees as well of Asian descent or Asian heritage, I think that it probably is quite a hard one because when the Atlanta shootings happened in America, obviously it's it was like, oh well, they have guns in America, kind of we're trying to maybe differentiate or separate ourselves from that, but actually, obviously, it's still very much a reality, even in varying different forms. I wanted to ask Charlotte and Ace, because you didn't get the chance to answer this, when you kind of first became aware of your ethnic identity.
When I first became aware, I think I was a little bit on the later side, to be honest. And I feel, I guess, lucky that I was able to grow up in a very diverse area where I didn't feel very out of place as an Asian person. I suppose for me, like Lainey maybe was mentioning, um, the it was going away to college that allowed me to become very aware of my Chinese and Asian identity, just because it's the first time where I'm not being seen directly next to my parents, so that my adopted identity is not immediately apparent, so that people see me first as as Chinese, as Asian, and make certain assumptions that would not I wouldn't that they wouldn't necessarily become aware of my adoptee identity unless I actively took the step to tell them. And this was also the first time that I became more involved in Chinese American associations. I was involved in my Chinese American Association at my college, as well as the Asian American Students Association. And actually, my way into that was I was involved in those associations because of my adoptee identity, because they had a club that was, or a program for Chinese adoptees called the Chinese Adopted Siblings Program for Youth. And those were connected to the Chinese American Association. So actually, I never really thought about actively joining them on my own. I was sort of led into them via the adoptee identity, which was interesting. And I thought personally, I know everybody, of course, and this book speaks to everything that I'm going to say. Every individual adoptee has a different view and a different experiences. But for me personally, I actually found that there were more similarities than I might have thought initially. And I think that a lot of Asian Americans and Chinese Americans have a lot of the same questions about feeling a disconnect with sort of cultural identity and sort of a modern American sort of youth culture or whatnot. And then the other thing that was sort of funny was because I had spent so long, and we'll probably get to this later, studying Chinese. In some ways, I knew a little bit more Chinese than they did, which was a little bit odd. And so I don't know. I think I did actually find a space there where I felt like I belonged, and I don't know. That might be unusual for Chinese adoptees, but that was my personal experience. And I'm sorry for going on. I'll let Ace talk.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go on too long on this, but I think it's very interesting questions, and I think everyone has given very good answers. I agree with a lot of things that you've said before, and I think when it comes to me, when I personally became aware of my ethnic racial identity, like I don't remember exactly when it was, but I know that like it was when I was younger in primary school, and I remember that it was I was on a bus, like on the school bus on my way back home, and there was someone who he started singing like a ching chong like song towards me, and I and he called me Chinese, and I was like, oh, I'm not Chinese, but yeah, I mean that is the thing that a lot of people think that all Asians are the same and all Asians are Chinese, so that was the thing. And yeah, it was obviously like I was young, so it was difficult like to process what that actually meant, because for me, like I knew because my parents had told me that I was from the Philippines, but I didn't really know what that meant really. So I think that kind of goes into the like feeling part of the Asian community as well, because I wasn't really part of anything like at all. I didn't really try to think about it, because also being raised in Sweden, it's a lot like color blindness is a very like big thing there. So you shouldn't really talk about like race and stuff. So I never really thought about it. But yeah, so when it comes to like feeling part of the Asian community, I never really did until like lately, when I've started to be like active, try to do it actively. But one part is that, for example, when you do like I've been part of international organizations, and many people probably do this during uni and stuff as well, or even other education, but you have kind of like international potluck, and then obviously like for me it would be more like natural to bring like Swedish food, so then it's also kind of a like I'm not part of like the Asian community, because when I think of my food, I think of Swedish food, like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing, both of you. And there are so many questions and topics that we can definitely like delve into. But I know that Lainey wanted to mention something briefly.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention something just about the fact that like racism happens to Asians all the time, and the fact that we didn't grow up with Asian parents is one reason why it's such a rude awakening to us to see like these outright hate crimes that happen that are more than just microaggressions, which is what many of us have experienced in school growing up. At least personally, I have. And so when you don't see racism happening to your parents, to your family members, then and then it happens to you and you're too young to understand it, and you're so racially illiterate, you're like, why are they being mean to me? Because I look different, and you don't have the words for it. So I think that's a big reason why so many transracial adoptees are like, just now, because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the rise in hate crimes against Asian people, of East Asian presenting looking people. It's just like, it's such a rude awakening of, and a real, a lot of us are really delving into our Asian identity and understanding racism and unpacking racism within ourselves, and just bringing down the model minority myth. Sorry for the tangent. But
hey, thank you very much. And I think this brings us on to another great question, because obviously not having those those natural support networks of people that naturally just get, that, or have had those experiences of experiencing racism or discrimination because they are Asian, as I assume most of our parents are probably white. What can parents or family members do to support, an adoptee who's of a different race, when navigating the world? Obviously, I appreciate this depends on the age and the country and stuff like that. But, if you could, I don't know if any of your parents are on the call today, but if you could say, talk to one of your parents today, what would you say to them?
I think it's definitely important that it's something that's brought up for me. I remember asking my parents a lot of questions as a child, so it kind of forced them to answer them, to talk to me about it, because I had questions, because I was like, why am I being treated differently at school? Yeah, I think the younger the child has it, the more time they have to like process it, I'd say. Like, I was asking questions as young as like 5 or 6, and I think it's just important to remind them that, like, it doesn't make them any less Asian from it. It doesn't mean that, like, just because like the parents are white, that the child is, and it's not something to be ashamed of, because I think as much as my parents tried, they never quite got that through to me, and I spent a lot of my childhood wishing that I was white, almost, to stop the bullying, because I don't think my parents ever quite tackled the aspect. And I think it's just important to remind the child that, like, yes, they look different to everyone else, but it's not a bad thing. And at the end of the day, it's on the parents of the other children to teach them that, it's not okay to bully kids for looking different. I feel like I didn't answer the question there, but I think that's definitely one thing that I think I wish could have been different for me when I had these conversations with my parents.
Thank you very much. I think, yeah, as much as we'd love to like give out some great advice, I think, it depends so much on the context, on the child, on the parents. There's so many variables, so not one advice isn't going to fit every scenario. Lainey, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Don't your child, your kids, and they, regardless of their age, they may or may not talk to you about the racism they're experiencing, and they may not feel comfortable doing so. So respect that. If they're younger, I think as parents, you need to address your own understanding of racism, not just like individual people being mean to one another, because racism is so much more than that. It's institutional, it's systemic, it's all of that. So do your own education in understanding racism against whatever race your child belongs to. And please provide your child with a community of people who look like them, because they are best able to support your child. While you yourself as a parent may want so hard to be everything for them, understanding that you can't in that way, but being able to provide them with that community is so crucial. Have adult friends who belong to the same race as your child, because I never had any role models who were also Chinese. Like the first time I had any real interaction or friends who were Chinese, who were not Chinese adoptees, was when I went off to college. Like it shouldn't have taken me till age 18 to have a community, to like have friends who were not Chinese adoptees and East Asian. Like that's really sad that that had to take that long. And because of that, I do not feel comfortable and I do not feel accepted within the Asian community. And like what you are doing as a parent is raising a child to be an adult. And so you, as a parent of a transracial adoptee, are raising that child to be a Asian adult, a Black adult, a whatever racial identity that child is. You're raising them to be an adult of that racial identity. So please prepare them. Please understand that community is crucial, and having role models is really beneficial. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. And I think, you know, if any parents or adoptees are attending this now, obviously it's, you know, pretty, it shows, you know, that you've found, you know, you're wanting to engage with this community, even if it's, you know, an Asian adoptee community, not necessarily an Asian American or Asian British. That's still a good first step. Charlotte, as another co-founder of CCI, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a great question. And to be honest, I don't think I have a great answer to it, which means that I'm really grateful to hear about Grace and Lainey and Ace's and of course Hannah Mae's perspectives on this. To be honest, I feel like I really haven't had a serious conversation with my parents about race yet. And maybe part of that is not wanting to accept them, which that it's its own thing that I would have to unpack. And also, yeah, I guess maybe part of that is that just like I haven't done the work that I need to do in sort of processing it for myself. And so so I'm not sure, I don't really have any advice. But I think that, yeah, maybe I think like everyone was mentioning, each adoptee is different and will be ready for these kind of conversations at different times. And, you know, maybe it's sometimes it helps just to kind of be there as like, I'm willing to listen when you're ready. I'm here. Yeah, I don't have to give you advice or sort of tell you what to do about it, but just I'm here to, you know, give you space to give voice to anything that you're feeling about racism, even if that's to say that like I don't know if I have too much to say about it yet. And just then I think that is acknowledging that it is an important part of the conversation, and that it is something that you see and acknowledge that your child is of a different race and that is an important part of their identity.
No, thank you very much. And Ace, I know Charlotte's just spoken about her own journey. I know you've been on your journey more recently. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
So yeah, I think I would just say that like I think also like it's a bit difficult giving like a good answer to the question, but I think it is a very like good question. And I think when I thought about it like earlier, trying to come up with with something, I was kind of in the same like what Lainey mentioned before. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think in a way it's really difficult teaching like something that you're not like that doesn't happen to you. So maybe like as a white parent, it is difficult to teach someone about racism when you haven't like experienced it yourself. So I think yeah, the fact that kind of trying to find or like have friends who are of the same race. So I mean, obviously not like making them like in a sense that they should have like putting their responsibility to on other people to teach like your kids, but kind of just exposing them and making it possible to do that. Because also, I mean, it's kind of like a side thing, but like when I grew up, it was similar. Like I didn't have a very big like Asian community around me because I grew up on the Swedish countryside, so there was mostly like Caucasians. And what we did have though was there was another like siblings that were also adopted from Vietnam. But the thing there is obviously they're in the same situation as like me and my sister, who's also adopted, whereas they also don't know about the Asian experience or anything. So yeah, I also don't have like a very good answer to that, but I think that is like what Lainey mentioned is very good.
Thank you all. Even though you say you're like, oh, not sure if I have the greatest advice, I think the two key things that I've kind of pulled out, my two key takeaways from your answers is obviously to provide a community, as Lainey mentioned, and also, as Charlotte said, also just to provide a space, even if, your child might not want to talk about it or know that they want to talk about it, just, being aware that you should offer this space is quite an important one. We had a question from an intercountry adoptee who said, sometimes I feel a disconnect from my Chinese heritage because I don't know the culture or don't speak the language, and it makes me quite sad. Do you ever feel this way, and how do you deal with your feelings? Maybe Grace?
Yeah, I can go again. Yeah, I definitely feel that way. In high school, I had some friends in my friendship group who were non-adoptees. One of them was South Korean, and the other one was also Chinese. And I definitely had a bit of like imposter syndrome when I was hanging out with them. Both of them spoke like Korean and Mandarin respectively. Their parents were like they weren't adopted, and they had a much better understanding of the culture and language than I did. So when I was around that, it was definitely a struggle. But I always kind of said to myself, like, it's not like their fault that they're more in touch with their culture than I am. It's not my fault that I'm not in touch with my culture either. Like it's not my fault that I am adopted. I can't help kind of not having the same understanding. But I think definitely part of that is what led to me eventually starting to reconnect with my culture. Because I was like, it sucks, but yeah, like I do have the option of reconnecting if I want, and kind of exploring that side that I kind of put off for so long, which kind of eventually led to these feelings. Um, it's definitely something that I've only started to unpack myself over the last few years. And I think that's partly as kind of conversations about race and whatnot have become more open and acceptable, I'd say. But yeah, definitely get where you're coming from in that.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I know, Charlotte, you mentioned in a previous answer that you felt that sometimes, in some occasions, you actually kind of had more of a connection or more knowledge of your Chinese heritage than, say, other ABCs, American-born Chinese people that you met. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah, this is a really interesting question for me. And now that I look at it again, I definitely, although my first response was to say that in many ways I've been working to fight this kind of disconnect in my own journey and my own experience, in actively pursuing Chinese language classes, and Chinese history classes and Chinese sort of culture classes, in my in schooling. I was a East Asian Studies major in college, and I think Lainey also can also speak to this. I studied Chinese language and history, focused on that, and I even, I took Chinese language classes throughout middle school and high school, and then college, and then even some, some high level like classical Chinese classes. So I went kind of like a sort of deep dive there. And in a lot of ways, I think that was my way or my in to exploring my my heritage. And I think now that I think I've been sort of educated by a lot of the Chinese adoptee community, that there are so many other different ways besides learning Chinese and learning about China, to explore one's identity. So I'm not saying that this is the only way, but for me, I think that was the way that I was able to find an in or find an access to Chinese heritage and Chinese culture. But when I look back, honestly, I think it really does stem from the same feeling from this member or a participant who put forward this question. So I really resonate with it. And I remember, I think, although I don't know if I remember this or this is something that my mom was telling me about, but when I was younger, one time I think my mom and I were talking about, my birth parents, and I think it was brought up that, the chances of meeting them were very low. And I said, well, but even if I did meet them, I wouldn't be able to talk to them. And that sort of made me really, really sad in the moment. And I think in a lot of ways, although it might not have always been the most direct driver, it has been a motivation, an underlying motivation for learning Chinese and wanting to connect with the culture. And I think in many ways I've had to also, like Grace was saying, sort of just accept that there are ways that, there are experiences that I'll never have, and there are ways that things are, lost irrevocably. When I went to China the first time, I think there was a certain sense of sadness, in the sense of like, that I'll never, I know it sounds sort of, what does it mean? But the idea like I'll never be fully Chinese. And the idea like, well, what does that mean? And what does it mean to be Chinese? And does it mean like, well, I lost the language, I lost a certain experience that I would have had? And I think it's grappling with these questions and grappling with like, well, how helpful are these questions of like, what would my life have been, that sort of thing. And I think everybody has a different answer to that. And for me, honestly, I think those sort of questions have not been the most helpful. I think I've had to, for me personally, it's been more helpful to accept what's been lost, and see, how right now I'm able to have the opportunity to reconnect in a way that's unique to being a Chinese adoptee. And in what ways can I meld, my current experiences with a reconnection with Chinese identity, and in what ways does that make some kind of new or kind of unique identity?
Thank you so much. I think you really summarized the nuances of this conversation. I think that many adoptees have in their heads pretty well. Lainey, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so thank you for whoever submitted this question. I think Grace and Charlotte both did a wonderful job of describing how I feel. I did a lot of cultural reclamation in high school and in college. As an undergrad, I did Asian studies, but it was really East Asian studies, focusing on China, Japan, and the two Koreas, and just really delving into the history. And I minored in Mandarin. There is a deep joy and sadness that comes with learning about my heritage, whatever aspect that may be. And as Charlotte mentioned, it's like the idea that I will never get back what I lost. Like, I was not born to be Chinese American. I was born to a Chinese family. I was meant to be Chinese living in China and having those lived experiences. In terms of how I deal with my conflicting feelings, I'm working on just like allowing myself to feel the full range of emotions of both like joy, sadness, anger, depression, anxiety, whatever I'm feeling regarding my cultural reclamation. So there are periods of time, as of right now, I am not really actively doing anything. Like, I should be studying Mandarin, but like it's really bad right now. But because it makes me really stressed out to do so. At this point, I'm like getting stressed out thinking about studying Mandarin again, even though I know I should be doing it. I mean, it's on my CV. But it's things like that. It's really, really hard because I was raised culturally white American. And so my default is to revert back to that and be like, this is my comfortable space, is to do nothing. But I find so much joy and also sadness in reclaiming my heritage, and that's so important to me. And traveling back to China and speaking Mandarin and learning about the people and the culture and everything means so much to me, but it is so deeply painful at the same time. So I think what I would say is allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. If you want to reclaim any aspect of your heritage or be involved in the Asian community wherever you live, like go for it. And your experiences as an Asian person are very valid. Like you don't have to justify how you're feeling to someone else, even if it is conflicting. It's all valid.
Thank you so much, Lainey. And last but not least, Ace, do you have any thoughts on this, being disconnected from your Filipino heritage?
Yeah, so definitely, like I can definitely relate to what everyone else has said before, and also to the person who sent in the question. I've definitely felt the same. But for me, it was kind of like when I grew up, I think Grace mentioned this earlier as well. It was kind of, I think that for many reasons, and something that I've kind of realized later, that like I felt like I wanted to be white, and I think it has to do with like internalized racism and all this stuff. But so I didn't try to like research about it, like Filipino culture or anything, because I was like, oh, I just want to fit in, and I don't want to think too much about being different. I just wanted to fit in, and that is something that I definitely like regret now. So I'm trying to to reclaim my culture in like in many different ways. And I think like I'm doing a very like roundabout way of doing it, but I'm kind of I'm trying to I'm listening to like Filipino podcasts, trying to watch like movies and TV shows and stuff like that, because luckily like English is one of the official languages there, so it's also possible to kind of like understand what they're saying. So it is kind of a bit easier in that way, but then it also like what I meant with saying that it's a like a roundabout way is that maybe the easiest thing would be to kind of like try to find like Filipino people and talk to them directly. But I think then it comes up what also I think it was Grace that mentioned that earlier, that it's like the imposter syndrome like kind of comes in, and it kind of also feels weird that I'm like, oh, I'm a Filipino adoptee, I want to learn more about Filipino culture, can you teach me? And yeah, it kind of just feels weird that way. So I think I've tried to do it through like media and stuff.
Yeah, I think it is very important to remind people that they're not imposters. And thank you, Lainey. And that yeah, it's your birthright. To reclaim your heritage, and you know you're a valid Asian. I can't believe I have to say that out loud, but you are valid as an Asian, and I think that's something I've learned as well. I've recently, not to get too personal, because I realize I'm not a panelist, but I recently started joining more East and Southeast Asian groups in the UK, and I remember I kept apologizing for being an adoptee. I was like, "Oh, sorry, I'm not a real Asian. I'm like a fake Asian right now." And they were like, "Why are you apologizing?" And then I was realizing, yeah, it's because I didn't feel like my experience was valid, having grown up in a white family. But actually, like I think it is valid, and you don't have to excuse yourself for that. We've actually had a really great question from an attendee. Have you ever been back to your birthplace? And if you have, how did you feel in the moment? And if you haven't gone back, would you want to? Charlotte, do you want to quickly answer that one?
I have been lucky to have gone back to China a number of different times in a number of different capacities. One of the major ones was going back on a heritage trip with my family. My sister, who's also a Chinese adoptee, not biologically related. She's adopted from a different province, so we all went back and we visited our orphanages. And yeah, I think at that time I was 14 and my sister I guess was 12 or 13. She's about a year and a half younger than me. I think at that time I hadn't done a lot of the thinking about identity that I have done in recent years, and that is still ongoing, of course. But so it didn't really hit me too much. I think it was just sort of like a cool experience. But then in recent years, I've been able to go back, including a recent, in 2016, I went back with a friend to do a birth parent searching trip. And that was actually the first time, yeah, that I would say that we were traveling. I've traveled alone in China. And so that was definitely an experience that allowed for more growth. Not that I think that it was necessarily bad to go with my parents back then. In fact, I mean, of course, I had to because we were minors, but I think it's just a different experience to be seen as, and to be traveling around as yourself as an individual, as an adult adoptee back in your country of origin or birthplace, or however you'd like to refer to it, than it is to be traveling and to be seen in the context of your family, and with the as immediately seen as an adoptee. So what are the other questions? How did I feel in the moment? It's complex. I think I have now, it's sort of like a love-hate sort of thing going on. And part of that, of course, is just that China can be a difficult place to travel in. And now, of course, with rising, political tensions, and of course the rising anti-China, in particular sentiment that we've been seeing in recent administrations and in the general climate. It's added to the kind of tension of feeling sort of pulled between two identities or two worlds sort of thing. And then also feeling like you don't totally belong in either. So there's that, of course, coming back to, like, I guess, is that the title of Ace's podcast? Somewhere in between sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think that would be probably a good way to sum up my experiences back then, back in China.
Very much for sharing. I think it's a very apt title. Grace, have you been back to your birth country, and how did you feel?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to visit China in 2017 on a school trip. And that was actually like what I'd call like my awakening moment. All credit to my parents. Growing up, they tried their best to try and get me involved in Chinese culture. But because of all the racism and stuff, I kind of distanced myself from it. So like for the 3 years I was in Mandarin lessons in high school, I just basically messed around the entire time. And it wasn't until I got to China I kind of realized should have paid more attention in those classes, because when I was there, I was like the only Chinese person on the trip. So they all flocked to me, but at the same time, they were kind of bemused by me because I looked like them, but I didn't speak their language and I didn't dress, it was like I looked like them. Yeah, I was Chinese, but I dressed in like a Western way and I didn't speak the language. I actually had several incidents where people came up to me thinking I did, and that was quite embarrassing, really. And it basically it does go back to the whole kind of in between thing. I kind of realized that I am kind of stuck between these two cultures, and I've distanced myself from my birth culture for so long. Like, it was an amazing time there. I really got to like experience what it was like, but there was definitely a bit of sadness, kind of thinking, like, if things had turned out differently, I would be there like everyone else. It was like an awakening moment, like, oh my God, I can't believe I ignored this part of me for so long. I love it here. But at the same time, there was obviously the reminder of like, yeah, I kind of, when I was adopted, I lost kind of my chance to be kind of like everyone else there. But yeah, like I said, that was really kind of what got me to reconnect with the culture, because I was like, I've ignored this for so long, and I didn't really, like, I can't ignore that part of me like any longer, really. Yeah, that was a big unpacking moment for me when I went, and I definitely want to go back again now that I actually know a bit more about the country and the culture. I didn't actually go back to where I was born, my hometown. So if I was to go back, I'd definitely go there instead. Yeah, that would be another unpacking moment, I think, but who knows?
No, thank you so much. And Lainey, do you have anything you'd like to
Yeah.
share agree with
No,
Grace?
I mean, I agree with a lot what Charlotte and Grace said. I've been fortunate to travel back to China 7 times, and of those 7 times, I've been back to my hometown 5 times, and I visited my orphanage 3 times, and I did like extensive birth parent searching between the ages of like 17 to 21, I think. Anyway, yeah, the first time I went back to China, I was 12. And I remember touching down. We flew into Beijing, I think, and I cried as soon as the plane touched down, just like realizing that I'm home, like for the first time back in the country where I was born. That was really emotional. I don't think I'm was capable or like am capable of fully processing how emotional it is to be back. Like, I love going there. I did study abroad there, and it was so much fun just like being in China. And each time, because I did study Mandarin in undergrad, like my Mandarin got better, so I felt like more comfortable. And on like 1 or 2 occasions, people would come up to me and like, obviously my accent was not of a native accent, but they didn't automatically assume I was a Westerner, which was really great. And like, I was like, I'm blending in. So that was really awesome. But I think it's really tough being an intercountry adoptee, because you are no longer a native of your birth country. And so there's so much emotion that comes with going back to the place where you were born, where you were presumed to be raised and have a life there. So yeah, it's amazing, but it's really painful.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Ace, have you been back? Or if you haven't, would you like to go?
So, like as I mentioned before, my sister is also adopted from the Philippines, not biological, but I was there when we were to like pick her up, or yeah, maybe that's not the best way to put it, but yeah, I think I was around like 7 years old, so I don't really remember that much from it. So I kind of feel like I usually say that I haven't been back because I feel like I haven't, because I don't remember too much about it. But I really, really want to go, especially now with everything that's happening. And I put that kind of like very high on my like priority list. So I'm trying to like mentally prepare, because also as Eleni just mentioned, I think it's definitely going to be very like emotional coming back. And also now, since I'm like older and I've thought about doing this like for a longer time now, and I'm more aware of myself and where I am in my journey and everything. So yeah, I kind of can't really wait, because I just want to know what it feels like, and I'm trying to prepare. Also, I think it was Charlotte that mentioned that maybe if I because I have started a birth search as well, so depending on if I can depending on that goes, that maybe like I'm trying to learn some Tagalog, which is the other like official language, which is like Filipino, essentially. So I'm trying to learn that also, like in case something happens with birth search, so that I could be able to communicate. And I'm just really looking forward to it, because I think it's also, I think we mentioned this before, that like can you become like can I become Filipino again? And like it's really difficult to like know, but I think I have gotten to a point where I feel like I want to try. And I think that is definitely like being there. I think it's definitely a thing that I need to do to kind of to accomplish that, because I don't feel like I can sit in like I'm obviously in Germany right now, so I'm not in Sweden, but I feel like I can't become Filipino like if I've never been there. So that is definitely like a very first step that I need to take.
Thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and thoughts on that. I know it's a very personal question. So moving back to, I guess, present day, with the lockdowns easing in the UK and the US and some European countries, maybe not Germany, sorry Hayes, how are you feeling about going back into public spaces, public transport, etc.? I don't know, Grace, as our token Brit, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, can do. Honestly, working from home for past year, can't wait to go out. But there's definitely like, I don't think much will change, to be honest, for me. It's definitely nice to get out there from like a socialization aspect, but even throughout lockdown, I've been getting looks, throughout. So it's not as if I've kind of got to say to myself, oh, great, now everyone's gonna look at me, and everything. I mean, I live in quite a small town and I do dress quite differently to everyone. So it's always a fun game of, are they staring at me because of the way I'm dressing, or the way like I just look, like Chinese, or both. Um, so like I don't think much will change. So because of that, my feelings around like my feelings of nervousness going out every time, that's not gonna change. Maybe I am more exposed now, more people are going out, so it'll give the chance for like more racists to pick up on me being out. But I've been getting looks throughout all of this, so at the same time I'm kind of indifferent to it. It's I can't like escape from it anyway, regardless of lockdown. So for me, it's just sort of yay, more stairs sort of thing.
No, thank you for sharing. Charlotte or Lainey, I think I know some of you have been vaccinated and you can go out a bit more. I don't actually know much about the situation in the US, but do you want to share your thoughts and feelings?
I'm vaccinated, woo! But I'm still wearing a mask. And yeah, I mean, I'm like one of those people who like puts in their headphones, will wear sunglasses and like keep their head down just like whenever I go out, because I just like don't want to interact with people. And I'm also naturally a homebody, and it's the summer and I hate the heat. So I think I'm gonna be okay this summer staying in the air conditioning. But when I do have to go out, I know I need to be very careful. And I have been trying to be really careful throughout this entire pandemic just because of the rise in hate crimes. And I don't want to be hate crimed. So yeah, I am nervous. I'm on high alert, but I'm also like keeping my head down avoiding people. So that's my strategy.
Thanks, Lainey. Yeah, I think I completely agree. And I don't really have too much to add besides that I think I will be definitely more aware, try to be more aware of my surroundings. And I think maybe incidents that I'm thinking back on different incidents, especially like on the public transportation. I think that maybe I wouldn't have connected with racism may be connected, and I think I'll be more aware if I see those things going forward.
Thank you so much. And Ace, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that actually, like, Germany is like I don't remember the word now, but it's like it's different in there's like different states inside, or like regions inside Germany. So all the regions do differently. So actually, it started yesterday. They opened up more here in Hamburg because the incidence rates here are low now. So they've decided that they're fine with opening up. So now now you can do outdoor dining, for example. And for me, who's very like active and extroverted, maybe like in that way, I'm kind of excited to for things to open up again, because I'm kind of like I've been climbing on the walls here because we had the lockdown since November, and it's half a year, and it's it's been very difficult. And also I've gotten the first shot as well, so the Pfizer gang. uh, I'm very like I obviously, like, I did notice in the beginning that people were kind of looking my way, like in the beginning of the pandemic. I felt that more, but now I don't know. I feel it's not like the safest way to think, maybe, but I'm kind of like, oh, I just want to be outside more. And then
Thank you all for sharing. And I think it's been touched on a little bit, especially I think by Grace. The fear of obviously having to deal with more discrimination or microaggressions. I just wanted to ask you whether or not you've had obviously these experiences. How do you deal with microaggressions, especially as one attendee actually submitted a question to say, how do you handle microaggressions when you don't want to cause a scene over what's maybe a minor thing, or you don't know how to explain yourself due to a disconnect? Maybe people you're with who don't see you as an ethnic minority and don't recognize that it's a microaggression. Lainey's smiling at me, so I'm going to pick on you.
No, I don't think I handle them well, but I think what I'm just going to start doing is like very loud and firmly just saying no, like not today, not dealing with this. And we'll see how they deal with that, because like, yeah, I haven't dealt with, okay, at one point I did, like someone asked me where I was from, and I, for once, didn't say China. I was like, oh, I grew up in Texas. And they were like, no, where were you born? I was like, oh my God. It was an Uber driver. It was really annoying. But I think, yeah, now I'm just going to be like, not today, Satan. Like, back off, leave me alone. I think that's what I'm going to do. And we'll see how it turns out for me.
Yeah, good luck with that. I don't know, Grace, if you have anything you'd like to share, any tips or how you've dealt with it in the past.
I've always had them kind of growing up, and I always kind of was purposely vague, kind of like, well, I'm from Morecambe, if that's what you're on about. And they kind of go, no, but like, where are your parents from? I'm like, they're also from Morecambe. And then obviously I kind of go, yeah, I'm from China, if you know what I mean. But now, like, as I've got older, I don't actually get them as much. It's kind of concerning about how, like, most of the times I've been asked these questions is when I've been like younger teens, like 13 to like 16. Now I just kind of get the kind of stares. But there was actually one incident back in December when I ended up going out, and some guy, it wasn't even a microaggression, he was just outright throwing abuse, and I didn't have the spoon. So now I just kind of ignore them. Microaggressions, I just kind of give them a bit of a stare, I won't. I'm like, I'm like, they're not even worth my time. You know, it's probably not the best way to deal with it, but I'm not a big person. I'm not a big person for confrontation, so I just kind of give them a look, kind of like, I'm not even wasting my time on you. Like, you're not even worth it. Kind of, um, just like, who are you? Why do I need to care about you, sort of thing. Um, Probably kind of helps that I look kind of antisocial in the first place, so they kind of back off. Um, but I've just kind of straight up just sort of kind like started to realize that they kind of, when they say these things or whatever, they kind of want the attention, they kind of want to kind of eventually get a rise out of you. So if you kind of go to them and kind of say, I'm not bothering you, kind of shuts them down that way. It's kind of like, I'm not even going to bother engaging with you. I find that's the easiest way. Probably not the best way, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess. It's worked for me so far.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think a running thread of these answers and this talk is that there's never, a right way to do it, but it all does seem to depend on the circumstances and how comfortable you feel as well, confronting the situation or, wasting or using your energy for that situation. Ace, do you have any thing you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think I would just say also that I think, or at least for me, I think it's like the microaggressions are like very difficult to handle because, yeah, again, like as we said, like, oh, should you give energy to it? And also one example that happened to me quite often, like at uni, because I mean, to be fair, it was also like I studied in a very like international student city in Sweden. So the thing that would happen like quite often would that like Swedish people would come up and speak to me in English, and I was like, oh, I'm Swedish. But then like also to be fair, I like with a lot of international students, I mean, I would look like an international person. So it's kind of again like, oh, do I give them like, should I be annoyed with them or should I just like let it slide? Yeah, I think that's difficult. And I think also another time when I didn't know how to handle the microaggressions and when it was really difficult was when I was working in the UK. Actually, I had a summer job there, and the thing was, we were like, it was like like English teaching company. So like student came to the UK to learn English, and I was one of the like managers at the like camp, so to speak. And the thing was that there was another guy who was from Macau. So he's and yeah, so he was also Asian, and but the thing was like he was much like taller than me because I'm quite like, you can see that now, but I'm not very tall. He was much taller than me, and the thing was that people would like mix us up all the time. So his name, his name was different from mine, and people would come to me and say like, oh hey, and use that person's name instead of mine, and I was like, but can't you tell that we're two different people? Like we do look nothing alike. And that would happen like throughout the summer. And it was, yeah, it was just really difficult to like process and like to handle, because obviously for me, I'm like, oh, we look really different. And I think the feeling that I had was that like when people do that, like again, it's not as direct as maybe something like when like a hate thing, but it feels like they don't see you like as an individual or like a person. So I think that's that makes the microaggressions like really difficult to handle, I think.
Thank you very much for sharing that. A really quick follow-up question. I don't know if anyone has anyone experienced this from someone from your like inner circle, like family members or close friends?
Just like microaggressions?
Yeah.
Because like from close friends, I remember in middle school. So I'm dyslexic, and I went to a specialized school for my middle school years for kids with ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, whatever. Anyway, I was a good student. I studied, I got good grades. And then some of my closest friends would be like, oh, you just got good grades because you're Asian. It's like, excuse me. We're all here because we have a learning difference. Like I would be at a different school if I didn't have an issue with learning. So like, are you kidding me? And it's really painful because they would make little racist jokes. Like one of my friends cropped my face onto a photo of, I think it was Lucy Liu from Kill Bill or whatever. Like cropped my face onto her image and like posted it on Facebook. I was like, what the heck? Are you kidding me? And we were in middle school. It's like one of my closest friends. Like, why would you do that? Just like assuming that like they treat you like your friend and like you're one of them until it has to do with race. And then it's like, oh, but you're Asian. And I'm going to make a microaggression about how you only get good grades because you're Asian. Or like all Asians look alike. It's like, I don't even look like her. I mean, like, I wish I did. She's gorgeous. But like, I don't even look like her. So those are like the types of microaggressions that you can get from even your closest friends. And that's really painful because you think that they're your friends. And I've called out, I learned to like call out people occasionally when they've done that to me and then they've stopped. But it's hard to call out a close friend when they are being racist towards you.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And yeah, I think again, it's very hard to know what the right thing is to do, but I think yeah, the right thing is definitely to call it out however you do it because it's not okay. There are two more questions, if none pop up, that I wanted to ask the panelists. The first one actually is directed at Charlotte. Someone asked, I'm a mixed race child of an adopted Japanese mother and noticed that there are very few resources for the children of adopted children or adoptees wanting to connect with their heritage. How would you recommend someone in my situation find others to connect on this? And also, do you ever wonder about the risks of like partnering up with someone from your birth country who you might accidentally be related to? Charlotte,
so definitely these questions are really good. And on the first one, that's such an interesting question. And I show a little bit of background why this is relevant. My mom here is an adoptee herself. She was adopted from Massachusetts in the 50s and domestically, of course. Or well, not of course, but she was adopted domestically from Western Mass. And yeah, this is such an interesting question. And I honestly, I think I haven't put too much thought into my identity as a child of an adoptee, so much as my identity as myself as an adoptee. Just because I've always thought, well, I guess because for me personally, I've always thought of my identity as adoptee as in perspective from myself. But I think that the question of being a child of an adoptee is definitely an experience that I don't know that I would be the best person really even to, not that they're like best people, but I don't think that I would be able to give a full answer to that because I haven't, as an adoptee myself, I think I have a slightly different perspective. But I think honestly that this question is going to be something that is going to come up more and more as Korean adoptees who have already many of them who have already had children, and then Chinese adoptees. I have a very close friend who's a Chinese adoptee who has just given birth to her first daughter, and I think that is such an interesting. They're going to have their own questions, and I think there will be. I don't know honestly, but I think there should be, and I wonder if there are already communities out there for there are ladies telling me for children of adoptees who are going through their own identity journeys as a child of an adoptee, and also then like looking into their past and what does that mean. Yeah, I mean, I think Well, for me and in my relationship to my mom, I think that the way that it's affected me most is that she's always been really open to discussing adoptee topics, and I also feel that she gets a lot of the experiences that might be a little bit more difficult for non-adoptees to understand. For instance, the interest in one's roots and one's heritage, and the motivation to seek out biological relatives, and how that is, not a measure, any kind of measure of your love for your adoptive for your family. And I think she really gets that, and her own searching story really inspired my own. So that's the way that I think, my the fact of being a child of an adoptee has affected me. But I also think that it would also there's also like I said, an aspect of it that I can't really speak to.
Lainey, if you have any links or something, please feel free to put them in the chat box.
Yeah, I think there was an Instagram thing. It was Adoption Mosaic. I have to find their Instagram, but one of the founders, I think she might be a South or Central American adoptee, and she had like a panel or something for children of adoptees, because I think there's a lot of generational trauma associated with being a child of an adoptee, and just because you lack half of the history of your biological family. So you lack the medical history, any racial or whatever kind of trauma that is passed down from your biological parent who is the adoptee. Because what I've learned in speaking to adoptees who are parents is that parenting as an adoptee is a very different experience than parenting with when you've never had that family separation, when you've never experienced that. So like, I will never pretend to understand what it's like to be raised by someone who is biologically related to me, who looks like me, who is of the same race, cultural heritage, whatever, as me. Like, all I know is the life that I've lived. And in doing so and having that experienced family separation, that alters my understanding and how I lead my life today. And that will impact how I would future parent a child that is biologically related to me, because I will have never experienced a biological connection. I mean, like, if I'm lucky and I find my family, my birth family, that will impact me in a different way. But like, having that connection and seeing someone that looks like you and is biologically related to you is such a visceral feeling. And to not have that growing up, and to be an adult and still not have that, is very different. So yeah, sorry, went on a tangent. But the second part about dating, yeah, for me, interracial dating is a lot easier because I don't have to worry if I'm dating a relative. If I do date an Asian person, I'm gonna be like, please submit 23andMe DNA, because I do have 23andMe relatives who are not just of Chinese heritage. They're of from other Asian countries heritage. So I'm like, please submit DNA if we are to date. That's gonna be my rule.
Oh, I was going to ask, has that worked yet? Have they complied?
Oh, I haven't really dated interracially. I'm like, I went out with one Asian guy once, but like, aside from that, it's mostly interracial dating for me.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing, both Charlotte and Lainey. So one final question is, maybe we can just, as it's 9 o'clock now, we can just quickly go for like a one word or one sentence answer. If you could give a fellow younger adoptee advice about something you wish you had known when you were younger, for example, prior to starting university or going through school and exams, what would it be? Grace, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think as weird as this might sound, I think being adopted doesn't matter as much as you think it does. People, I mean, from my experience at least, people don't care. It doesn't change anything about you. Yeah, it seems a bit weird after like this whole thing is about, like identity as an adoptee, but I found that kind of going into university, I've told people, and it's not changed the way that they treat me. you still see me as Asian, you know. Yeah, seems a bit weird after everything we've been saying today, but it's not that big a deal.
My biggest piece of advice is you don't have to prove yourself to anybody. I think that a lot of us as adoptees have, and just as people, I guess, have a lot of expectations on your shoulders, and feeling like you have something to prove. But yeah, just it's being in the moment more, and following your interests. It seems sort of cliche, but I wish that somebody had told me that.
No, thank you very much for sharing that. And Lainey?
Yeah, so a couple things, like especially when I was little and I guess getting older, like it's okay to be sad. All your feelings that you're feeling are valid. You're valid as an Asian person. And then also your point of view on like how you feel about being adopted or whatever can change at any point in time. Like it is not a linear lived experience. You are allowed to change your point of view and your opinions, and that is completely okay. So yeah, basically that. And it's lifelong. Seek help if you need it. There is a community out there for you to support you. There are people who are willing to hear you out and support you. Find good friends. Find people that validate you and love and support you regardless of how you're feeling. So yeah, find a good support system.
Yeah, it's gonna sound very cliche, but I think it's like, yeah, you are not alone. I think that that is definitely a thing, because I kind of thought like another side of this question, like what would I have told like myself as a younger adoptee, and that is something that I've definitely like realized now just lately, that like what Lainey just said, like I was just making notes and she said exactly the sentence that I was writing. I was like, why is this happening? But there is a community out there like for you, and I think that's something that we're all like doing here, and also like CACH-All, like spotlighting and highlighting that there is like a there is a community or several communities for adoptees, so you don't have to like feel like you're alone in all these thoughts and feelings that you're feeling. So just know that you are not alone.
Well, thank you everyone so much for that, and hopefully that was a positive message to end today's Q&A on. Could we all give a virtual round of applause to all our guest speakers? Thank you, Ace, Charlotte, Lainey, and Grace for joining us today.